So hi everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to do this panel today. I think it's really exciting that we're able to do this online and to kind of all meet each other and talk about this issue of queerness and religion. If we start with introduction, so my name's Ella, I'm a trustee at LGBT Switchboard, my pronouns are she, her, and I don't really have any qualifications to do this panel apart from the fact that, you know, I did grow up in a kind of faith background myself and I'm Jewish, so I'm kind of having that dual experience of being LGBT and from a religious background and kind of identify with. So if I go next to Mark.
Sure. Hi, I'm Mark Dowd. I was born and bred and raised a Roman Catholic. I'm still a practicing Roman Catholic. I'm a journalist. I did train to become a priest for a couple of years, and I've written about some of the things extensively in a book recently published called Queer and Catholic.
Great, thank you, Mark. Welcome. And next, I've got Pritpal on my screen.
Hello everyone, I'm Pritpal. I'm here on behalf of SARBAT SIKHS, representing the Sikh faith. I grew up as a Sikh and identify as a Sikh follower now. I work in HR and look forward to talking to you all this evening.
Thank you, great. So if we go to Lisa Jane next.
Hi there, yeah, my name's Lisa Jane. My pronouns are she, her. And I am here, I guess, as the Protestant to Mark's Catholic. So I grew up in a pretty conservative evangelical church, of which I'm still a member of today, actually. And that church itself is on a bit of a journey, as is the church all over. So, but I'm here representing today One Body, One Faith, which is the oldest Christian LGBT support group. We've had many guises and many names over the year. We started as the Gay Christian Movement in 1976, then we became the Lesbian and Gay Christian Movement, and in 2017 we became One Body, One Faith to reflect a wider concern in the whole spectrum of gender and sexuality.
Great, thank you. Yeah, a bit of similarities, I think, between Switchboard as well and the names we've had over the 70s. Yeah. So Dahlia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dahlia Fleming. Pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I work for an organisation called KESHETUK UK. We work to create a world where no one is forced to choose between their Jewish and LGBT plus identity. So I was brought up in a Jewish community. I went to an Orthodox Jewish secondary school. And now at KESHETUK UK, as an education and training charity, we work with Jewish schools and youth organisations and synagogues and communal organisations to try and ensure that any Jewish LGBT plus person, whether Orthodox, Reform, Liberal, Masorti, cross-communal, I can explain all those words later if you want, have the experience that they're expecting to have.
Great, thank you, welcome. And then finally, Osman.
Hi, my name is Osman and I volunteer for an organisation called HIDAYAH. So sadly for many LGBTQI plus Muslims like myself who are not out in the community, reaching out to organisations like HIDAYAH can provide that important support. And our mission here is to provide support and welfare for LGBTQI plus Muslims and promote social justice and education around the queer Muslim community, and also fighting discrimination, prejudice and injustice.
Great, thank you everyone. It's great to chat to you today. So I have a few questions to ask, and I think we've got about an hour. I guess for me, what will be important is to kind of cover obviously some of the challenges faced by people from a faith background or a religious background who are LGBT plus, and also some of the kind of really good examples of inclusion and community, because I think there's two sides to the story really. So it would be great to get a sense of both. And maybe what I'll do is just ask the question, and then I'll go around probably in the same order, and we can share things that way. And if you wanted to add anything, then just let me know. Just cut in there. So I guess thinking about the different religious communities that you represent and that you're a part of, how are people who identify as LGBT plus viewed within those communities? So maybe starting with Mark again.
Yeah, well, I belong to a LGBT plus group called Quest. It's a Roman Catholic group which was set up in the early 1970s. And I guess we were set up simply because of the perceived hostility and lack of welcome from the official church. Perhaps compared with some other panelists here tonight, we have one particular handicap. I hope this isn't going to become one of those issues of we all have to compete to see who's the most oppressed and who has the most difficult journey in this discussion. But the Roman Catholic Church does have in writing some really fierce language. It talks about same-sex desire as being intrinsically disordered. It talks about our orientation being objectively disordered. And basically, it basically says if you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, or any of the other potential other sexual orientations or genders that don't fit those classic traditional nuclear family issues, you have to live a life of celibacy, because the only thing that's really legitimately honoured is marriage between a man and a woman. That leaves an awful lot of people out. So Quest, the group that we started back in the early 70s, has had to forge, if you like, a space, a safe space for Roman Catholics and also other Christians who join us to come up with an alternative narrative. And put simply, the desire for somebody else of your own sex is a naturally occurring variant in the human condition. It's not a perversion, it's not something freaky, it's not something which is disordered or a disease. But the problem that our church has had is simply seeing it as, quotes, natural. In other words, naturally occurring, just like being left-handed, just like having blue eyes instead of brown eyes. That's the journey we've been on. So it's not been easy, and still the official teaching of the church isn't welcoming, but things are changing, and perhaps we'll talk a bit more about that further on.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I'll come next to Pritpal.
So SARBAT was formed in 2008 in the UK. We are the oldest LGBT support group, Sikh group in the world. So comparatively, compared to other groups that are here, we're very young. But then the faith is also a young faith, only over 500 years old. So Guru Nanak, the founder, was only born in 1469. So obviously that's relatively very young. So in terms of the perception of LGBT plus people, as the view from a faith perspective doesn't say that we don't have the right to be LGBT, or there's nothing around our existence not being acceptable. And interestingly, I was sort of looking at sort of views from various countries around the world, and from Sikh religious leaders or MPs. There's been quite a lot of sort of discussion around same-sex marriage, recognition of partnerships, and it seems that more of the objections from Sikhs on a political and a religious level comes to same-sex marriage not being something that they consider to be, and I'll quote it, as normal. Sikhism believes in equality. Everybody is equal before God. So so we are all the same before God. God resides in us all, and there is one universality, which is God, which exists in everything. So from that point of view, from a faith perspective, it's easier. But there are still challenges around trying to challenge the status quo around things like same-sex marriage, which obviously are very important to people from LGBT plus backgrounds.
Great, thank you so much for that. And next I'll come to Lisa Jane.
So I think we're in a similar situation, I think, to what Mark has said about the Roman Catholic Church. I think one of the challenges maybe, sort of the question was, how do people who identify as LGBT plus, how are they viewed in your community? And I think Protestantism it's such a wide kind of space. So you've got, on one end you would have people who would believe that anyone sort of LGBT or any different identity other than sort of straight and cisgendered is viewed as, of the devil almost, a sinner, heinous criminals. aligned with paedophiles and murderers. So that rhetoric is still very much alive in the church today. But then at the other end of the Protestant church, you've got groups who are actively campaigning to bring about equality within the church networks, and you've got churches who are already doing same-sex marriages. You've got denominations like the Baptist Church who are able to decide on a local level whether they want to do same-sex marriages within their building. And then you've got something like the Church of England, of which I'm a member, where there are churches who want to do it but can't because the overarching hierarchy won't allow them to do it. And so some people are doing it under the radar, doing sort of, you know, marriage ceremonies and prayers after blessings and things like that without telling the bishop and stuff like that. So we really have the full spectrum and everything that you can imagine in between that. So I think it's a really difficult question to answer, because there is no one view within Protestant Christianity of how LGBT Christians are viewed. It probably veers more down the, you know, the other end from the we want same-sex marriage and we want it now. So I think that would be not necessarily the norm, but I think, as Mark said, the church is on a journey, as are many faith groups. So see what else we talk about tonight. Be interesting.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, and so I'll come to Dahlia next.
I think it's similar within Judaism. There is a really broad spectrum. I think in parts of the Jewish community, particularly in the UK, LGBT plus Jewish people are essential, right? They are viewed as essential members. Their voices are critical in order for the community to be fully inclusive and actually fully achieve its own kind of objectives and follow its own like values and ethos. There is definitely parts of the Jewish community in the UK who still deny the existence of LGBT plus Jewish people. And as I think, as we all know, there are LGBT plus people in all parts of society and in all faiths, no matter how much denial there may be and how much silence there may be. So it really varies kind of between those two ends of complete silence to the parts of the community in which there is more explicit homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, even within acknowledgement that there are LGBT plus Jewish people or their family members within a community, to the point where we also have parts of the Jewish community, particularly kind of the liberal movement and the reform movement, who have been at the forefront of LGBT plus rights in the UK in general, not only just within their own movements, but there are still lots of conversations taking place, I think, within large parts of the Jewish community in the UK, really trying to understand what it actually means to be inclusive of their LGBT plus members in terms of many different parts.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dahlia. So yeah, and finally to Osman for that question. Thanks.
Sure. So generally speaking, the majority of Muslim community do not accept homosexuality. That's me being honest. So some Islamic states impose a death penalty on people, and other states imprisoning people under morality laws. Luckily, in the UK and Europe, LGBT Muslims have become more increasingly visible in recent years. Luckily, we're protected by European anti-discrimination laws. It's not the same in some parts of the world. Now, the good thing is some queer Muslims are challenging views of heteronormative attitudes in Muslim society today. So they're using scripture and hadiths, giving positive examples of queer identities in Islam. Now, the one thing I also want to kind of mention is, in the past, scholars have pointed out that Muslim views on sexuality diversity have become much more conservative in the last century. So while Islam has for centuries been much more tolerant than other faiths, there's other factors that need to be considered, like colonialism, and sadly, the opposition to Western exploitation has created this kind of general reluctance against loads of different things. So yeah, at the moment, I think we're in a journey.
All right, thank you, everyone. Yeah, so I think something that came across to me from those discussions is the kind of variety. So obviously it's difficult to kind of pin a certain view on an entire religion, and obviously within that there's going to be a lot of variation. And also I think the challenges between, you know, what might be written in religious text versus what is cultural and what is kind of based in the community. That seems to be a bit of a theme as well. So I guess kind of thinking about thinking about the flip side of that, as we talked about some of the challenges, especially faced by LGBT people, could you share some examples of where people from the LGBT plus community have been kind of included, and really positive examples of where that space has been created? I'll just switch up the order and maybe start with Osman this time.
Sorry, that was examples of good examples of inclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
So we last year had talks with several Muslim societies in around different universities across the UK. So we were approached by Muslim students who wanted to know more about the experiences and the lives of LGBT Muslims. And this, I thought, was quite a breakthrough, because we can use the young people who can actually talk to their elders, talk to family members, and give a sort of better insight. We have worked with different mosques. We've done events around Ramadan, where we've had events that we've worked on together. We've also recently spoken to the Malaysian government officials regarding the treatment of LGBTQI plus Muslims in their own nation state with regards to acceptance. So there is positive work happening. It's just happening slowly, but we're getting there.
That's great. Really good to hear. And then maybe from Lisa Jane next.
I think the fact that this is a conversation that's happening here across the faiths, but also, you know, internally within the church, the fact that we're even having this discussion is quite a good example and a good step in the right direction, if you ask me, because it's been silenced for too long. People who have been, you know, anything other than heteronormative have more often than not left the church or had great struggles within it. But there are now, you know, there are many organizations and small groups within the church where people can be openly gay, trans, whatever, and do that within a church. We have the Pride service every year, obviously not this year, but we have the Pride service after the parade every year. And so many people come to that, and it's a really emotional experience for them, because they're not out in their own church. They can't be, or they can't receive communion with their partner or anything like that. Whereas at the Pride service, they can. Everybody can be a part of that. So I think, you know, that's a great example of that inclusion. And the Christians at Pride network, which goes across the country, making sure that in as many smaller parades, not just Pride in London, but, you know, all the prides over the country, there's a Christians at Pride group, hopefully in the march or in the sidelines, or having a stall at the little fair and things like that. So I think that's a great example of how people can connect with others who are open and visible, and how people can begin or continue even that journey of discovering that they can absolutely be a Christian and be somewhere on the LGBT plus spectrum. It's not one or the other, as Dali was saying, you know, the two things work very well together. So I think there are lots of places now where people can go for resources and for networks and build friendships, and it's good. There's still a long way to go. As Osman said, we're on a journey just as much, but there is a lot more visibility. I think that's a really good thing, of course.
Thank you. And should we go to Pritpal next?
So one of the benefits of lockdown has been that SARBAT, being a small volunteer-led group, have been able to do a lot more work online. So as soon as lockdown started, we started weekly online socials where we were sort of talking about different topics. Quite encouraging. Last month we did one around how to be an effective ally to LGBT SIKHS, and we got the biggest ever attendance of people dialing in on the call. That was really encouraging, and people were actually asking, what can we do? We want to help, but we don't know what to do. So it's opened up quite a big area of work that I think we need to sort of invest some time in. So that's really encouraging, that there's a lot of people out there, but they're not quite sure sometimes what they can do to support us and to help amplify our voices. There's also some positive things that have been happening around the Sikh schools. In the UK, they've been inviting LGBT role models into schools to come and talk about their lived experiences. So they're actually showing positive role models of a diverse background from within the Sikh faith, and talk about alternate, different to the heteronormative messaging that they normally get, to be able to hear from people who have different experiences, from whether it be about gender identity, gender expression, or their sexual orientation being other than straight. The Sikh Gurdwaras, again, are a mixed bag. They are becoming much more welcoming. When I sort of have talked to people in SARBAT before, they've talked about when they were first set up and used to organise groups to go to visit the Sikh Gurdwaras, which are places for worship. There was an experience when they went to one in Leeds where they were made to feel very unwelcome, and it was very clear. Subsequent to that visit, it's been, any visits that they've done to other Gurdwaras have been much more welcoming and much more inclusive, and made them feel much more part of the community. So there's lots that's happening in this space. I think there's a long way to go, but there is some positive signs that we are seeing that there's a change in attitude.
Great, thank you for that. And Dahlia, do you want to speak next?
Yeah, I think there are lots of different kind of examples, whether it comes to kind of Jewish ritual and people thinking about how, when Hebrew is quite a gendered language, like what can you do to try and make that more inclusive, and make our rituals more inclusive, when actually also Judaism is quite a gendered religion in terms of a lot of the kind of rites of passage and things that you do. And there are lots of different communities thinking about what does that really look like? How do we adapt? How do we adapt beyond just for that moment where an LGBT plus Jewish person asks for it, but in a kind of more widespread way of actual kind of really changing and understanding the culture. I think it's also kind of fun that if you Google like first same-sex marriage in a synagogue in the UK, like there's lots of competitions about which one happened first. And I think the fact that they're competing over it and you can't quite tell who came first really shows like parts of the community who were trying to put that marker. But actually across the community, particularly kind of at the work that we do at Keshet UK, we see and hear and listen to the conversations, and they're really, it shouldn't be understated, the conversations that are happening, from people who are kind of still at, the ABCs rather than the XYZs kind of thing. And actually, 2 years ago, we worked with the Orthodox Chief Rabbi in the UK, Chief Rabbi Mervis, on a guide for Orthodox Jewish schools on the well-being of LGBT plus pupils. And that was a really big deal. It was one of the first times that an Orthodox rabbi of his standing had said things about homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying being unacceptable, and really having that kind of shared goal about the well-being of young people enabled that conversation to happen. And that for me was a really positive step of understanding kind of the responsibility that communities have when they've not really said much. And a lot, kind of as we've all expressed, lots of our communities have caused harm and are causing harm directly to LGBT plus people. And I think sometimes we're othered and we're thought that we're like somewhere else. Like it's nice to be nice to LGBT plus people, but like they're not here. It's why I always say Jewish LGBT plus people, so that I'm not removing myself from a conversation. And it's been really amazing to see actually the breadth of the Jewish community, while some are still very much, and I can't underplay the harm being caused by the silencing in parts of the community. There are lots of conversations. Some are confidential, some are public, but they're full of real care and real love to try and work out what to do. And I think seeing that, although it doesn't take away the harm being caused, is something that I find very positive to thinking about, what could happen in the future.
That's great, thank you. I'm kind of thinking of loads more questions as everyone's talking, as though there's so much going on. So yeah, finally for that question, if we come to Mark, thanks.
Well, if I could blow the trumpet for our own organisation on inclusion, I mean, for the best part of nearly 60 years now, Quest has had an annual conference. We've had groups up and down the country. We've had right from the 1970s, a support line for people to telephone and to get in contact. And you know what's really interesting about this is the difference between the official and the private sayings and utterances sometimes of bishops and priests. They might condemn in public, but they know of existence of groups and organizations like ours. And we've heard many, many times people say, you might want to go and visit this group, you might want to ring this number and have a chat to somebody. I'm sure Lisa Jane will echo this. You know, in the Church of England, in her case, in my case, in the Roman Catholic Church, gay men are hugely overrepresented in the priesthood. Now, this can go two ways in terms of inclusion and support. It can either mean self-hatred, which means people loathe themselves, and often these are the vitriolic opponents, because in fact they are having a war with themselves. They're so uncomfortable in their own sexuality that they externalize this onto others. Defined, particularly in groups of nuns, in groups of monks, and other religious communities. Think about it. Why would somebody go into religious life? Consciously or unconsciously, they may well be gay or lesbian or bisexual, and certainly not super straight. Often these people do have their arms open. They do have their doors open. They won't get on a soapbox and criticize the Vatican and get into trouble in that way. But in that quiet, gentle, on-the-ground sort of welcome, they will make it absolutely clear that you, as a child of God, are welcome through their doors. And that's fantastic, you know. And that's a great asset that I think the Roman Catholic Church in particular has in this regard. But we're proud of the fact that we set up a long, long time ago. And even though we're only probably about 250 members in the whole country, I'd like to think that we do punch a bit above our weight.
Great, thank you everyone. So that, yeah, again, like really amazing to hear some of those examples. And I think I was just kind of reflecting on it a bit, but that split between the public and private seems to be really important. And I think that came across really strongly. We had some training at Switchboard as well, kind of related to religion and the choices people are making about public versus private coming out. Yeah, so kind of really positive stuff to reflect on that. I guess to kind of bring stuff right into the present, how have you found the kind of impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the people that you work with, and what support has been available to them? So maybe starting with Pritpal, if that's all right.
So as I said, when lockdown started, SARBAT came online straight away to start an online community. One of the positive impacts we've had from that is that it was very much London-based and occasionally did road shows around the UK, and even actually managed to make in the past a visit to New York. So yeah, so it's tried to stretch out, but obviously that's quite difficult in the number of people you can reach. So having the online regular sessions has been amazing in the number of people that have been able to now start connecting with SARBAT, starting to share their stories. Starting to develop a sense of community. We've published some really good sort of stories people have shared from their own experiences of how that's been really important to them in terms of connecting, how they couldn't get to London before to connect with SARBAT and to make any of the events that were organised. So that's been a really positive thing. In line with that, we've also then gone on to develop things like book clubs. There's a Sikh study group. So there's various different groups that have sprung from this initial social that we started, and the take up has been amazing. I mean, in terms of the reach, we have been having people regularly dialing into our events from as far away as New Zealand, Malaysia, Thailand. As well as the other side of the world of Canada, all over Canada, USA, regular participants from Italy, Switzerland. So that is something that we would never have been able to have done before. In terms of impact on religious communities, obviously not being able to go to the Sikh places of worship, gurdwaras, has been quite damaging for a lot of people who would regularly like to go and join in collective worship. That's not been possible. It hasn't resumed in the way that it has done before. But again, the Sikh community quite broadly have been really good at adapting to lots of online services that have been going on. And in fact, you can now dial into your service of your choice with your favourite people who perform hymns or meditation, or there's so many different types of groups that you can join in with. Say that there's lots of choice out there, and it's funny because even when I talk to people who are older, or from my parents' generation, for example, even they've adapted to it in a way that I would not have imagined that they would have thought possible before. So it's so there have been some positives in terms of trying to adapt to life online. Although obviously it doesn't make up for not having that face-to-face contact that people are probably crave a lot as well.
Yeah, great to hear some of the positives there as well. So maybe coming to Mark next.
Yeah, in our community we have organised online prayer, online discussions and talks, but I think this notion of choice, because in the Catholic world, people are very faithful normally to their local parish or to their local. Simply because of the fact that their family have been there, or it's the nearest place to where they live, or they know some of the people there, and the tea and biscuits are great afterwards, and you always have there's a social element to religion and worship as well as actually what goes on in the church. But what's happening during lockdown, of course, people have become more spoiled for choice. And if you've been going along to a church where you realise that the sermons are rather boring, and suddenly you've got a choice of joining services at 2 or 3 different cathedrals and getting extremely good theology and fantastically imaginative preaching, people suddenly think, and what's interesting now that some of the churches have begun to open up again in the Catholic world, some of those online options are being withdrawn because of the fact that it's difficult, to have the conventional Eucharist and liturgy, as well as providing all of the stuff via the internet. And I think some people are actually missing it, particularly the elderly, particularly the infirm, particularly the people, even in our gay LGBT plus world, we have elderly members, over 75, 80, who aren't the most mobile. People have been relying on this, and as a challenge to us now, do we want to withdraw this? Do we want to say, as lockdown hopefully to fade away, do we suddenly draw up the rampart and say that's not available anymore? Or do we use the technology to actually continue this sort of discipleship of people? And it's that takes time, it takes commitment, and it takes quite a bit of imagination. So I think these are challenges that we face.
Yeah, definitely. So that kind of idea of choice is quite interesting, isn't it, when people aren't necessarily used to that. Maybe coming to Lisa Jane next. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So there's been similar to what everyone's saying, actually, that we've taken everything online, everything's gone into the virtual world, and that's had its pluses and its minuses. But I want to talk about the pluses a little bit, because I think what Marcus said is really valid and something that we are considering as well. This how we manage going out of lockdown and what digital content looks like after this. During the lockdown, One Body One Faith have been organising a space to be a gathering, sort of an online gathering with Zoom. Actually, that's in collaboration with a number of organisations. As One Body One Faith, we're quite a signposting organisation, so we work a lot across the spectrum of LGBT Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, and Space to Be is in collaboration with Quest and a few others, one of which is another great LGBT network called 223. And I'll just share some of the challenges we've had with some of our lovely 223 and Gathering Space and Diverse Church members. Quite a number of them are younger folk and may have spent time during this lockdown period in houses with family members who either don't know their sexuality or their gender expression. They're not out at home, they're not out church. They're not out at all. The only place they are out is when they come to our meetings. So they've been able to access those meetings from home, where maybe they weren't even able to come to them to start with. So we've had a lot of discussions with people, and really helping and supporting people who are in what you might call lockdown in an unsafe space. And that's been quite a concern for those of us on pastoral teams of some of these organisations, as well as at One Body, One Faith, who are sort of, you know, I wouldn't say umbrellaing, but kind of pinpointing people to these other networks and organisations. So I think that's been one of the challenges that the pandemic has definitely set, and I'm sure people in the other faiths represented here would have similar stories of being locked down in unsafe spaces, and the particular challenges that has for people, that we hope we've been able to address and support as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we found on the phones actually at Switchboard, is we're getting a lot of calls from people, especially younger people living with families, and kind of struggling with some of that. So yeah, really interesting to hear. Osmo, can I come to you next on that? I'm just going to turn my light on, but I'm still listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what Lisa and Mark have said in terms of the challenges, because people like myself, I'm isolating with my family. I'm not out to my family. However, I want to talk about the positive things that have happened to us. So we started our events, and we're now reaching out to people in Saudi Arabia, in Tunisia, in Nigeria, in India. I mean, it's incredible. We have tonight over 150 people registered for one event. And these people will not get the chance in their country to be able to discuss openly about their sexuality. I mean, we have one person said, "Oh, I'm so amazed that you have this event. I'm in my bedroom, I can watch a Pride." I mean, imagine sitting in Saudi Arabia where you can actually take part in a Pride event. You can actually chat to different organizations. You can talk about some of your issues. And what we've also done is I'm so excited about this because it's just been so powerful for us. We've actually been able to reach out to film directors and other artists, poets around the world and say, would you like to reach out to your LGBTQI plus Muslim community? And so we've had people screening films for us online, and people, you know, sort of empowering people to start up their own Zoom groups. And that's what I think is amazing from just this one pandemic has turned into this kind of global effect on positive effect on some people. So there's always a positive and a negative, and that's what I wanted to kind of finish with.
Yeah, great. That sounds amazing as well. Yeah, and finally, Dahlia.
We've had a similar experience where we've had people who volunteer for us who will go into Jewish schools who weren't able to make videos for us because they're not out at home. So I think, you know, across the board, and especially because we work with a lot of the youth organizations within the Jewish community, trying to support them on how do they communicate. You know, if someone isn't able to speak and they're doing something around Pride or just in general, you know, are you using text functions and are you sending people earphones and that kind of stuff to try and facilitate kind of conversations, but also because we're working with general Jewish organizations to try and just remind them that actually someone who might be out in their spaces may not be out when they're at home, no matter their age. There are people of all ages who have gone into spaces where they aren't safe, and to try and just really make sure that the community doesn't forget that and doesn't make those kinds of assumptions. I think early on in the pandemic, the Jewish community was particularly, a lot of people died. The Jewish community was overrepresented in terms of the kind of percentage of deaths compared to the size of our community. And so I think early on that was a real thing that was impacting like the wider Jewish community in terms of how we were engaging, and when you were going to services and when you were talking to people, that I think was something that was kind of impacting quite a lot of people. So it had that kind of real impact kind of across the board. In terms of our work, we created curriculums for schools, but we've also just been doing kind of we've been doing sessions we wouldn't have done otherwise, and then having an engagement from others. So we were doing kind of storytelling training to really try and ensure that Jewish LGBT plus people understand the power of their voice and what positive visibility can really do. And so often the visibility that is in the community is more negative or harmful or argumentative, or tries to make it seem like you can only be Jewish or LGBT plus. And we had we ran a session where we then enabled people we trained up in terms of storytelling to tell their stories. We had hundreds of people on the call listening and hearing the real experiences of Jewish LGBT plus people from around the country, and it was a really beautiful evening of enabling people to just have a voice and have other people listen. So that has been something that we probably wouldn't have been doing if it hadn't have been for kind of the Zoom world we live in.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think, I guess with that question, I kind of expected to hear a lot about the struggles of people at home and within their communities. So yeah, really interesting to hear kind of both sides of that and some of the opportunities that have been opened up from the online world. And I guess like a lot of lessons learned, you know, within Switchboard, within people's work and everything. So it's kind of reflected. I think I'm going to ask two more broad questions. So I guess thinking about, I don't know whether any of you already work together, but what do you think are the opportunities for kind of different faith and religious groups to work together on LGBT issues and support? And if you have any questions for each other as well, yeah, feel free to include that in the next bit. So Dahlia. What's been really interesting around this kind of Pride season is there's actually been quite a few different interfaith panels and different interfaith kind of events, and I think it's something that a lot of communities are trying to think about more, because actually, as much as we talk about the struggle that, you know, LGBT plus people have in their communities of faith, a lot of people of faith have real issues engaging in the LGBT plus community as well, in terms of going in and being honest about who they are. And getting the kind of the kickback, which is often so understandable when LGBT plus people have had real harm from institutionalized and organized religion. And so actually it's been really interesting seeing that. And so that we've been kind of engaging more actually like a little bit with parts of kind of like HIDAYAH and stuff around Pride with One Body, One Faith, but also there is a more unifying kind of groups of people coming together around kind of the thanks for the thumbs up, Osman. There's more work happening around the kind of call to end so-called kind of conversion therapies, because I think faith communities, more than most, when actually about 50% of people who are suggested to go to conversion therapy, it happens from someone of a faith organization, understand how damaging and dangerous and harmful it is. And with the government 2 years ago saying that they were going to end conversion therapy, and then there being quite a lot of silence since then, there's now kind of this kind of more work together to try and really make people aware that it happens in this country. It's not something that happens far away from us, and how damaging and how dangerous it is, and that it's not just therapy. There are so many different, well, it's not therapy at all, but I mean, there are lots of different ways in which things like so-called conversion therapy manifest themselves, whether it be what others might actually call kind of like torture or things like corrective, you know, there's real violence there. And that has been something actually that has been, I found, uniting a lot of the more faith in general and LGBT plus faith kind of organizations and groups. Great, thank you. So I think maybe I'll come to Osman next, because I can't see you. So yeah, I won't know if you've got your hand up. So yeah.
I totally agree with Dahlia as well. You know, it's, for me, I think we're all, as a collective, all faiths believe in helping people, you know, and just being there to guide people. And I think us all coming together is so powerful. I mean, we live in the UK here, where we have such a diverse group of people living in this one country, and the fact that we can come together and organize events together, and I think that's the way forward. I think there's a lot of sadly there's a lot of people within the LGBT community who see faith as a negative. You know, they've had experiences in their own families or with friends that they've had. Even my own experience, my boyfriend is Catholic, and you know what, his experience was very much similar to mine. He came out later on in life, which shows that, you know, even though we are totally from two different cultures, our experiences are still the same. And it's important that faith groups they are visible role models within the community that people can reach out to, that they don't need to choose between their faith and their sexuality. And I think coming together in these type of events will help everybody.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that, Osman. I might come to Lisa Jane next.
I was just sat here thinking about, there's a phrase that's used around pride. We've talked about pride a lot, but unsurprisingly, there's a phrase that's used around pride quite a lot, about pride. Pride, it's supposed to be a protest, it's not a party. And I think if you've come to an understanding of pride being a party and a celebration, then you've never walked the parade with a faith group, or you've never interacted with any of the faiths, because for us, pride is very much still a protest, because we're all living within hierarchies, no matter to what extreme, that have some forms of oppression in them, silencing. So I think the fact that we are able to be at Pride together, and very often in the parade in London, the faith groups are all sort of in a batch together in the march, which is I love that so much. It's one of the most moving things, for me. And I've been, in fact, last year I was leading the Christians at Pride section, dressed in my drag angel kind of amazing costume, which I adore. It was amazing. But I was following the pagan group, so they were in front of me, and then right behind us, every time I sort of turned round and tried not to hit anyone with my massive wings, behind us was a Muslim group. And it was I just love to see that, people of all faiths walking together. It doesn't, the faith aspect of it almost doesn't matter. It's the fact that we are standing together and saying, exactly what we've been saying tonight. You don't have to choose. You can be Muslim, you can be Jewish, you can be Christian, you can be whatever, Sikh, you can be Hindu, you can be, name all the religions in the world. You don't have to pick. You don't have to have one or the other. You can absolutely have both. So I think for me, the visibleness of that, if you like, at Pride is such a great experience, and one that I find really moving every year when I'm sort of, mincing down Oxford Street looking ridiculous. But it's tremendously good fun. And then I just wanted to say a little bit about that conversion therapy side as well, because I'd been thinking about that, and as Dahlia said, that's been something I think that's been quite unifying amongst the faiths, in that it is faith groups, no matter what the faith, where there is this high representation of people being sent for conversion therapy, or having conversion therapy done within their own mosque, church, synagogue, whatever. So that, I think, has been something that has been unifying to a point, but is something I would really love to see us work even more closely together, so that we can present a very kind of clear and unified voice to the government, because the majority of as I say, the majority of people who are having conversion therapy are coming from a faith community, and it has to stop. It has to stop, and it has to stop as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a really, really important point. So I might come to Mark next.
Yeah, I think in terms of cooperation and coming together, I think on campaigning issues, things like the conversion therapy absolutely give us a focal point for coming together. The danger with sometimes with the interfaith things is that you try and throw all these faiths into a pot boiler and try and come up with some sort of common, sentence or scriptural insight that links you all. And the next thing you know, there are lots of things that are really different between you, and it's quite an uncomfortable fit, and you end up saying, ooh. So I think the key thing is storytelling about the human. When I fell in love with a young guy at school when I was 16, it was a religious experience for me, because it gave me a glimpse of God. It gave me a sense of infinity. I mean, I don't want to get too sentimental here, but it was the first time in my life when I thought, I will him so much. And I think that, that's a common experience that people have of love, whether you're straight or bisexual or gay or trans or whatever. And I think that, one of the most successful Quest conferences we had back in 2006, I think it was, we invited both Jewish and Islamic representatives to come. And they spent the whole weekend regaling us with wonderful stories from their family of acceptance and the obstacles that they faced. And everybody listening to these stories thought, oh, that could be me. Yes, I've had that as well. We need to find role models of people who've had difficulties, who persuaded their parents, who persuaded their brothers and sisters, and reluctant friends to actually, through the sheer persistence of their humanity, get round the problem and come on board, because I think that is worth its weight in gold. And you know, it's storytelling, and we've all got great stories, and it doesn't matter whether we agree or disagree on various bits of scripture about whether there's one God or many gods, or you know, whether Jesus is the Messiah or not the Messiah, or whether the Pope really speaks for the whole of Christianity. I mean, really, these things are insignificant compared with the importance of those human stories.
Thank you. Yeah, and that kind of idea of storytelling has come up a couple of times today. I think it's a really powerful one. And then finally, on that kind of interfaith and working together question, Pritpal, if you don't mind coming in.
Sure. So I just want to endorse Mark's last point as well, really, because I think there's so much that we share, certainly from an LGBT plus experience, that we can probably learn from one another. So sharing those stories is really important, particularly cross faith, because I think that although we may have different faiths and believe in fundamentally different things, we are at one community, and we want to be able to have that community cohesion, work together. One of the things I think we can do really well, and I've certainly learned lots this evening, is learn from one another. We all face things such as homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all these sorts of things within our communities. It'd be really good to learn about how these challenges are tackled within other faith communities. How do other faith communities improve inclusion? That could be quite good in terms of learning, just so we can share those experiences as well. Because I've learned lots today about things that are happening that I think we could probably apply in our own faith groups or communities as well.
Great, thank you. And I think on that learning point as well, I think it's really important for kind of general LGBT organisations to learn from all of you as well. So for example, how do we at Switchboard make sure we're kind of supporting our callers who come from a faith background? So that'd be something we should definitely talk about and moving forward with that. So I think in terms of time, I'll just ask one more question, kind of thinking about the future a bit more. You know, how do you see things changing for LGBT plus people within your communities? Does anyone want to come in first rather than me choosing again?
I'll start if you like. Yeah, I think it's becoming really positive. Just to give you a quick example, so I was on this kind of app on my niece's phone. She was looking at TikTok and she was scrolling through it, and I came across this kind of a TikTok video of an LGBT person, a Muslim LGBT person, sort of saying that they're proud to be LGBT and Muslim. And I happened to go on to the messages expecting to see hundreds of negative messages and stuff. And don't get me wrong, there was negative messages there, like, oh, you can't be gay and Muslim. However, I was shocked to see a lot of Muslim people clearly standing up for, I just thought there was like this, there was arguments going on within the comment section. And it was amazing to see that actually there was more positive than negatives. And I thought that was really powerful. Now, TikTok is kind of open to everybody across the world, so there'll be lots of people watching this, and there'll be lots of people reading these comments and, you know, taking good and bad from it. So I think that's quite a positive thing. And using social media, I mentioned before about reaching out across the world, you know, it's actually quite a powerful tool if you use it correctly. And, you know, you can reach out to so many people. Within our community, the best thing we can really do is kind of, a lot of the discrimination we face, unfortunately, comes within our community. So what we are looking to do is exactly what Dalia is trying to do just now as well, which is to reach out into the faith community itself, go into the mosques, go into the schools, and sort of allow the leaders to lead by example.
Thank you. Yeah, sounds like a kind of exciting prospect as well. Does anyone want to come in next?
I'm happy to chip in. I think, you know, in quest terms for our Roman Catholic group, it's interesting that maybe in the 70s when I came out and I was looking around, the stereotype of the gay man was sleeping around, drugs, alcohol, late nights, and then guess what? You get to your late 20s and early 30s, and maybe there's something more to life than all this. I'd like to think that in a way that some of these faith groups do provide something like a safe port in a storm, when all of this kind of youthful thrashing around and finding yourself and energy begins to sometimes find a desire for a more kind of stable companionship, togetherness in groups. You know, these kind of the fellowship, I think maybe is a good word, is the kind of thing that we can offer to people. And it's hardly surprising. Probably the average age of our group will be well in its 50s. It's not exactly full of you know, teenagers and youngsters, but actually, bit by bit, I think we are finding that when people do get through those first phases of the excitement of coming out, they are looking for something slightly more long-term, not necessarily linked to the commercial nature of the gay scene and the gay world. And I'd like to think that's the kind of thing that we at Quest can offer people. And I'm sure lots of the faith groups would probably have those perspectives as well.
Great, thank you, Mark. Anyone else want to kind of chip in on that, the future question?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about community and community building, which is certainly something that One Body, One Faith does itself, but also seeks to encourage other organisations to do. I've mentioned some of them: 223, Diverse Church, the Gathering Space. There are lots and lots of different organisations out there. Quest, who are also part of us as well, because we got our Catholic brothers and sisters and siblings with us, which is great. But I think it's kind of going along the lines of what Mark said. He's waving at me. I think it is that need for community, and I think what churches provide. Now, I said at the beginning, I come from a very conservative evangelical church, and that has many faults and many things that it needs to learn. But one thing that I think the evangelical corner of the church is very strong on and very good at is family and community. It, as I say, it has places to learn from, but it is kind of an overarching strand of the Christianity that I grew up with, is that we are kind of in it together, whatever it is. We are a community, and being able to kind of bring that into the LGBT world. And a number of people that I know at some of those other groups are what we might call evangelical refugees, for want of a better term. You know, they've come to find something and seeking refuge from what they know, and what they find is actually something very familiar, which is community and friendship, and not just acquaintanceship, but proper deep friendship. Some of my very best friends come from this LGBT Christian world, and I am so thankful for it. And I'm thankful that I had a good grounding in a biblical understanding of hospitality and community, which comes from the evangelical church for me. So I think it's really encouraging to see that is growing, and that whenever people find one of these organizations, that's what they find. And you sometimes see the kind of almost like release of the tension that people hold with this whole, you know, holding their faith and their sexuality or their gender identity, and they find us and they go, oh, I can come here dressed in this and it's fine, and nobody judges me, and people accept me, and I have this community like I feel like I should have at my church. So that, for me, that's such an important thing, is this community. And I'd love to see that community grow to our multi-faith community, because I'm loving this discussion. This is wonderful.
Great, such great energy from everyone as well. So maybe I'll come to Dahlia next, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think there's like a lot of self-organizing going on within the Jewish LGBT plus world. We have one of the oldest, I think, LGBT plus social groups, nevertheless, like Jewish social groups, from the Jewish LGBT plus group that was started in 1972, which has also had many different names. But, you know, they've been running kind of Shabbat services and other kind of events. There's an organization called LGBT, which are predominantly for women, non-binary people, but they also run like other like events for kind of everyone. But it's been really wonderful to see that self-organizing happening, like Imavot Havot, which is one for kind of the parents who are LGBT plus. And I think that's been really important, because I think as much as at Keshet UK we work to make sure that the existing Jewish community is safe and welcoming for, you know, the Jewish LGBT plus people who exist within it, and we don't want to recreate the wheel as such. Like, there's a real importance actually for that particular space where you are settled and you are, you know, having everyone's understanding the jokes and the community and that kind of thing. But I think in terms of going forward, it's been really amazing seeing the level of engagement within the community and like the level of willingness to have kind of conversations. And a lot of what we do is about kind of having kind conversations and enabling people to ask the questions that they've had and say the things that they want to say and not feel like we're going to judge them for 5 years. Like, the thing that we do at Keshet UK is, you know, we say we are not Twitter. You know, we're not going to call you out. We're not going to suddenly put on, you know, social media that you said this or that said that. And it's not how we work, because we really understand that in order to have like an educational space, you have to have that kind of trust. And I think there's a real lack of trust in kind of the most umbrella-y way between like faith communities and LGBT plus communities. So that's something that I've been really inspired by, the fact that there's a real building of trust about the fact that, you know, faith communities aren't here just to kind of, you know, destroy LGBT plus people's lives, and LGBT plus people aren't here just to destroy faith communities, because actually we exist in both of them in a way that wants to thrive, and they're both our homes. So that, I think I'm really excited about seeing the kind of the genuine progress and engagement in terms of real action, and not allowing fear or complacency be that barrier to enabling you to start the conversation, to get rid of that silence and move into a real place of like active engagement, of working out what to do to kind of, you know, make spaces safer and more welcoming.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and finally to Britt Bell.
So just building on what Dahlia's just said, really, in terms of, if you look at equality legislation covering LGBT people, but also people of faith, that's put us in a really good position in terms of changing attitudes already. And obviously in September, there's going to be another law change, which is going to involve it being mandatory for relationships and sex education to be taught to all children in schools. So children can be taught about different types of families. So hopefully attitudes will be changing, because rather than, you know, children just learning what they're told perhaps in their homes, they'll be able to meet people who have different types of families, who come from different types of relationships and different life experiences. And hopefully we'll get to the point where, you know, when around race, there's this conversation around it's not good enough just to say I'm not racist, but you've got to be anti-racist. Maybe we need to take the conversation to the point where actually it's no good saying I'm not homophobic or biphobic or transphobic. We need to challenge it further than that and actively support the community. So I'm hoping in the future this sort of education will certainly help bring about some of that change and those conversations within homes where you perhaps don't get that balance at the moment.